What's going on, guys? Dan from SSG bringing you another Edison format deck profile. This time I am profiling my take on the Fairies deck. I think the deck is kind of underplayed and very powerful. I've had a lot of success with it in playtesting. And my list is a little bit different from the ones you see online by quite a few cards, so we're going to get right into the deck. I have the full 3 copies of archlord Kristya. I see a lot of people playing 2. Just play 3 of this card. It's the reason why the deck exists. It's extremely powerful. Being able to drop this down on the very early turns of the game, making a lot of your opponent's cards dead, is very strong. And in the late game, it's just absurdly powerful. And you want to just draw it often. Worst case, you can discard it to herald if you draw too many copies. Very strong card. It's the reason why the deck exists. Let's play 3. We have 3 copies of Shining Angel and 3 copies of Nova Summoner. A lot of people cutting the numbers of Nova Summoner all the way down to like 1. But I like having all 6 because it's just so consistent as summoning kristya early in the game. Being able to have access to at least 1 recruiter is very, very important. And honestly, drawing multiples isn't that bad, as it just it gives your opponent a lot of cards to just grind through. And that's sort of the point of this deck, is you want to be a resilient deck that helps that grinds through your opponent's cards. And these just give you access to the cards you're looking for to actually do that. And having the additional copies of Nova Summoner just makes the Kristya crashing combo a little more consistent, being able to fill your Grave of Fairies very, very fast. And I like all 6 recruiters. It has worked out for me. I then have the full 3 copies of Deed Warrior Lady. I see some people cutting this as well down to 2 or 1, but I think the point of the deck is just to grind out your opponent and be very resilient. This card just like helps you remove creatures. I think it's a very powerful effect, especially against things like Stardust Dragon, Treeborn Frog even, if you can cut them off from that. A lot of cards you can cut them off from. Zombie deck, you can get rid of their Goblin Zombie. I want full access to this card, and having the 6 recruiters and the 3 DD Warrior Lady is just very, very consistent at piecing together a game plan to be effective at removing creatures, and that's exactly what you want to be doing in this type of format, just getting them down to low resources and then dropping powerful cards like Kristya. So I like the full 3 copies here. And then full 3 copies of Dimensional Alchemist. A lot of this card is just really, really strong. A lot of times in the late game, you'll have 8 fairies banished, and you just have like so much access to cards you want, whatever you need at the time. Adding powerful cards like Kristya or DD Warrior Lady back. Very consistent. I also have a pretty high monster count, so this card on turn 1 is a little more feasible in my build than others. Having the Nova Summoners and at a full 3 copies can make this card a little bit more consistent on turn 1, and having a floater on turn 1 to play is just basically fine. It's very good. But most of the time you're going to summon this card off of your floating Nova Summoners and Shining Angels, and it's going to be excellent. So, good grind card that can attack over small creatures, as well as get powerful cards back in the late game. Full 3 copies of Herald. This card is, like I've learned, is pretty hard to play. Like, you got to know a little bit about the format to really decide on what you should be hitting with this card, especially in the mid to late game. But I think that the power of this card is also one of the things you want to be playing this deck for, and full 3 copies for that reason. Being able to interact with your opponents when they don't think you have a response with like no background play. Herald comes down and interrupts their whole play, and then you can kind of like keep your board position. There's been times where they attack into your gorz, but then you drop the gorz, and then they try to remove it on their main phase too, and then Herald comes down and completely flips the game on its side. So very powerful card. It makes it so you can set up boards that are kind of like unbeatable. Things like Kristya, just coming down and protecting your Kristya is very, very strong, and the cost of an additional card to do so is just doesn't not really matter in a lot of spots. So as long as you're targeting the right things, this card is going to be excellent for you, and it is one of the powerful cards in this deck that makes this deck worth playing. Full 3 copies of Ryko. I want all 3 because I just want to remove creatures. I want to be a very resilient 1-for-1 based deck, and that has a lot of power in the late game. This card helps set up your Kristya very easily. It interacts with your opponent. It mills cards into your graveyard, which is what you want to do. It kills big things. Card's just excellent. You should play it. It's very good. 2 copies of Honest. Of course, one of the payoffs of the Fairy deck, just extremely strong. Just helps protect your Kristya, helps protect your other monsters that you need to protect, and I think also just like you can bluff a lot with your floating creatures. You can have they never really know when you have honest because of all your recruiters in the deck. They might be attacking to them, or you might be attempting to crash into them, but then you honest them. A lot of cool plays you can play with this deck. You can crash all your recruiters into the honest, bounce the honest to your hand, and then drop Kristya with honest protection. Really, really strong. I like this card a lot. It's extremely powerful, and it's just another good card you can play in this deck, which this deck seems to be filled with them. It's a pretty awesome deck. And we have 2 copies of Soul and Purity and Light. I went with 2 copies. This card is really strong in this format. Like, anything that you can special summon and just put into play for basically free is strong in this format. And being 2,000 is like an actual threat. Attacks over the 1900 threshold, which is really strong. Things like Alias. Really strong card. Like, helps you kill your opponent. You can drop this next to a Kristya. This into Kristya, making your graveyard clear. It helps control your graveyard. And get it down to 4 fairies, then drop Kristya next to this card. Pretty much game over. Very hard to beat a board like that. Soul, Purity, and Light, very strong, and helps us kill our opponent. I have 1 copy of Freed. Very, very strong card, and extremely impressed with this card. I think it's a shame that this is one of the only decks that can play it. I'm working on building other decks with it because I think it's just very, very powerful. You can just pop cards and keep your graveyard clear of fairies, and the fact that it's not a fairy is also very good, so you can go down to 4 fairies by selecting 1 or 2, because this removes any light monster. Same with Purity and Light. You can remove lights and non-fairies to make sure you have exactly 4. But this card just deals with big threats, and it comes down with priority, and a lot of times it's just going to resolve, and if they bottomless it, so be it. It's fine. So very good card here. And sort of fueling the Soul, Purity, and Light and the Freed, I have 1 copy of Card Trooper. I don't see builds playing this. I think it's pretty solid. Just very good at getting your fairies in your graveyard so that you can set up Freed and Soul, Purity, and Light, but also just a fast Kristya. I think just dropping Kristya into play on turn 1 or 2, when you set Call behind this card, very, very strong. And also combos with Call the Haunted. That's not the main reason why it's in the deck, because, there's only 1 Call the Haunted. But I think Card Trooper is really strong. Just get your fairies in the graveyard. It beats down, replaces itself, which is another thing you want to be doing in this deck. Very good card. I like it a lot. I have Gorz, of course. Very good. Your last line of defense. Then spell cards, only 3. We have Heavy, MST, and Brain Control. Very strong trio here. Just very powerful cards that we want to be playing often. That's about it. Then we have Trap lineup. Pretty decent Trap lineup here. I have 2 copies of Bottomless Trap Hole. Cards just very, very strong. We have Solemn Judgment, Torrential Tribute, Mirror Force. Those are like the generic removal that we play. And then we have Dust Tornado. I like this card a lot. Just kind of like clears the way. Again, 1-for-1ing with your opponent. You don't really get oppressioned or skill drained, so that's good. Having more removal for that is strong. We have, of course, the Broken Trap Dustshoot, which we don't like to talk about. And then we have Call the Haunted, extremely powerful in this deck. Card Trooper or the Fairies or Herald of Orange Light, get Kristya in the graveyard, flip it back in response to something like a Book of Life. Extremely broken, just comes down and is very, very powerful. And then the Return from a Different Dimension, which is also just broken. We're going to have late game, massive banish pile, bring them all back, kill your opponent. Very, very good. Quick extra deck, Armory Arm, Catastor, Magical Android, Brionac, Goyo Guardian, Black Rose Dragon, Ancient Sacred Wyvern. You can make this. It helps you kill your opponent. It doesn't come up too often, but hey, if you can make it, let's put it in the deck. Stardust Dragon, Colossal Fighter, Thought Ruler Archfiend, Dark End Dragon. You only make this with Brain Control, taking something like a Caius and syncing with your soul, your Herald. So that's fine. I mean, I'll take it. It's a very powerful card, and a lot of times the only time you're syncering is when you Brain Control. So let's just play this in the deck. We have room. Red Dragon Archfiend, Avenging Knight Parshath. This one's pretty sweet. Card was never really played back in the day, but you have access to it. It's very niche. It answers specific things, but it's pretty solid. We have Mistworm and Chimera Tech for the Cyber Dragons on the sideboard. And sideboard, 2 DD Crows, and 2 cyber dragons. Pretty standard stuff there. Then I have 2 copies of Thunder King. A lot of people playing this card in the main deck, and I don't blame them. Thunder King is very, very powerful. I just want my deck to be as streamlined as possible with the 6 recruiters, the Nova Summoners being most likely the cards that you would cut for these 2 Thunder Kings in the main. But overall, I think you just put this in against when you go first in general in most matchups, but also against decks that can't beat it, things like gadgets and stuff like that. So, very good card. I had 2 in the sideboard. But if you want to main it, I don't blame you. It's very, very good in the main. 2 copies of Banisher. It's a fairy. It removes things. That's really good. You'd attack into your opponent's recruiters. You attack into goblin zombies and things like that. And then also, if it's dead, you just discard it to herald. So very, very strong there. On to spells. We just have one lightning vortex. It can sometimes be hard to come back from a advantageous board state from your opponent. You just come down, answer your opponent's stuff, and clear the way. Maybe drop a kristya after, and you win. 2 copies of Royal Oppression. This doesn't stop the damage step recruiters, so I think it's really good. You can just kind of float into your monsters and also just out your opponent's stuff. It's similar to another copy of kristya in that sense, as long as you have a big monster in play, something like a Soul of Purity and Light. So it's kind of easy to set this up and have a big monster in play and then just kind of get your opponent out of the game. It doesn't really impact you that much. You know, you can a lot of times beat down with something like a Warrior Lady when you have this card in play, so very good there. 2 copies of Rug. I like this card a lot in decks that lose fairly heavily to Caius. You don't want your recruiters getting banished. You want to be able to actually get those effects off, so pulling the Rug prevents Caius, and you just keep on pushing with your game plan. 2nd Dust Tornado, and Dimensional Prison. Solid card in Dimensional Prison. So that is the deck, guys. Let me know what you guys thought about the deck list in the comments below. I think it's a pretty interesting list, a little bit different than other people are playing by a few cards, but it's been working for me in playtesting. It's a lot of fun to play. This is probably like my favorite deck to play so far that I've encountered in the format, as it's just very, very strong. And you have a lot of important decisions to make throughout the course of a game. So, without further ado, guys, this is Dan V from SSG signing out.